Hi, my name is Becky Sorensen, and this presentation is on an internship that I did at Family Violence Prevention Services in San Antonio, Texas, during spring of 2015. The way that I found this organization was just through doing a search online for organizations in San Antonio that worked with families. And I was drawn to this particular organization because of the focus that it had on strengthening families, and especially families that really were in need. This is a nonprofit organization that provides intervention and rehabilitation services to victims, survivors, and perpetrators of domestic violence. Specifically, I worked with the Middle Way Parenting Program, which was through counseling services, which is a part of family violence prevention. So this is a 10-week program for mothers who are victims of domestic violence. So they come in 10 weeks, 2 hours a week, and it's in a group therapy session, or a group therapy setting, excuse me. Most of the clients that we receive are CPS mandated to participate in the parenting program, and most of them currently don't have custody of their children. The topics that we cover in middle way parenting are Piaget's stages of development. We talk about the difference between discipline and punishment and alternatives that they can use to punishment, because most of them, that's what they're using is just punishment. We learn about communication skills like active listening, and we also learn about family patterns, about how they have learned certain patterns in parenting from their parents and how they tend to continue those same patterns. We talk about what they can do to change those patterns, because a lot of times they're not very healthy, which is why they're in the program with us. My responsibilities when I first came in was to prepare files for audit. So we had an audit that was coming up, and we just needed to go through all of the files for all of our clients and make sure that they were all up to date and they had everything that they needed. That wasn't the most exciting thing, but it was something that needed to be done, and it made me familiar with the filing system. I also worked with marketing for the program. As I had mentioned, most of the clients that we received came through CPS, and so I had a list of every CPS worker in the San Antonio area, and I called almost all of the supervisors. And when I talked to them, I gave them a brief overview of the program, just to make sure that they were familiar with it if they had clients that could use our services. And then I tried to schedule a presentation with them where we could come into their monthly staff meetings and talk to them about the program and give them a little bit of a taste for what we did at Middle Way Parenting. I also went to a couple of WIC health fairs. So WIC is an organization that works with families that are in poverty to make sure that they have nutritional food for their children. And because of the population that they were working with, a lot of the women there also have issues with domestic violence. And so we wanted to make them aware of all the services that we have available at Family Violence Prevention, and of course more specifically with our program, Middle Way Parenting, in case any of them wanted to utilize those services. I also had the opportunity to do a little bit of networking with other organizations that were at these health fairs that also worked with families that were in poverty, so that they could give us referrals if they had clients that could use our services. I also did data entry. So the computer system that we used to keep track of all the clients was called Alice. And so after each time we have a group session, we needed to go in and write a case note for each of the clients, talking about what we did during that session. Actually, we did that every time that we interacted with the client. So whether it was intake or even a phone call, and that the reason we did that is so that we have the numbers available to show for an audit, and hopefully, get the continue to receive the money through grants for the program. Also, when a client comes in for intake, they're going to fill out a whole bunch of personal information through paperwork, and so I would go in and put in all that personal information for each of the clients and create a file for them. With the client intake, there's kind of two parts to that. So the first part I did by myself once I was trained on that. So the client would come in. Usually they came in one at a time. Sometimes we would do this in a group setting. But first of all, we would go over registration and orientation. So since most of the clients that come in are court mandated to come, we give them a graduation certificate once they complete the program. And so we let them know what to expect from the program, how it works, and also what we expect of them so that they can graduate. And, once they graduate, they can show that diploma to their CPS worker or to the judge to show that they are taking steps to improve their parenting, and hopefully they can receive their children back. So I would go over that with them. And then because of the situation that most of these women are coming from, we would go over a safety plan with each of our clients to make sure that they are in a safe place, and that if anything came up, that they had a plan to stay safe if anything came up. So that's the first part of the client intake. And then for the second part, my supervisor would come in and I would sit in on this part as well. But the client would just give a brief history of what brought them to us. So how CPS got involved, also how they were raised as a child, situation that they came from, and what kind of abuse they've experienced. So that was when we would really get the client's story. And that's important for us to see how they're progressing, and also to just be aware of the issues that surround each of the client. My favorite part of the internship was doing the group sessions. So we had 3 different groups. So 3 times a week for 2 hours, we would have a group come in and we would go over the different parenting topics that I had mentioned, among others. And I was able to help facilitate those, so I actually taught a lot of those parenting skills and practices, and also facilitated discussion on those, because we want to get the women involved and hear about their situation. And I just really enjoyed that part, because you could really see changes beginning to be made, and you could really see lights coming on in their lives as they're learning these things. So I learned a lot from this program. First of all, I just learned how a nonprofit counseling office works. So I learned all about the paperwork and the referral system and how grants work and what to do when a client comes in. All very valuable things to know. Due to the way that we worked with CPS, seeing that we received most of our clients through them, I was able to also get a good perspective on how CPS works. A lot of times when the women would come in to the group sessions, they would, talk a little bit about what was going on with their children in their situation. And so I would see, what CPS was doing in their lives. And also, as we would do the presentations with CPS, we were able to get, or I was able to get a little bit better perspective into what they did from their perspective of the CPS workers. I also learned about how victims of domestic abuse find themselves in the situations they do, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I learned about what domestic violence is and how it happens. So usually when we think of domestic violence, we think of just, husband beating his wife or something like that. But domestic violence can actually be a lot of different things. It can be neglect, it can be physical violence, it can be emotional abuse, psychological abuse, it can even be stalking. So I learned all about those different forms of it. And because I was there for the intake when the client would describe their situation, and also through the group therapy sessions, I would see what the client experienced in their own lives. So I would see how those situations would play out in a real person's life, which I didn't really have any experience with before. And one of the great takeaways that I took from this internship is just the value of social services like family violence prevention. A lot of these women have limited resources and they have a limited perspective on life. So they don't like the situations that they're in, but most of the time they just don't know how to change. And so as I was there, I was able to see a lot of women who would really take hold of the things that we talked about in class and that would really make changes in their life so that they could change the family patterns that had been passed down to them and stop that cycle of violence. And if it weren't for family violence prevention and other organizations like it, it would be really difficult for those women to really make changes. And so I really saw the value in those types of services. One of the connections that I made to my coursework in marriage and family studies was the looking glass self. So this is a theory by Charles Cooley, and in Family 400, which is Theories and Dynamics, we talk about this theory in conjunction with symbolic interactionism. And so the main idea with the looking glass self is that we live out the judgments that we imagine other people have of us. So when we do something, somebody is going to react in a certain way, and due to the way that they react, we're going to assume that they're thinking a certain way about us, that they're judging us in a certain way because of their perspective. And according to Cooley, we're going to tend to live out the judgments that they have for us. So for example, in the example of domestic violence, when a child grows up and all they ever hear is that they're worthless and that they're not lovable, then that's what they're going to tend to believe about themselves, and that's what they're going to tend to expect from other people in future situations. So when they grow up and they have romantic relationships, they tend to expect people to treat them the same way that they've been treated previously in their lives. And a lot of times that's really negative. And so it's so important that people who are victims of domestic violence really start to see themselves in a different light and start to see themselves as someone that does have value and that can be loved. And as they begin to see that, they can begin to make changes and to stop that cycle of going from one abusive relationship to the next and have good, healthy relationships with people. I would definitely recommend this internship to anyone who's interested in domestic violence or in parenting, in teaching that and also getting a perspective into the lives of the people that experience those situations. If you're interested, you can call Linda Canasales, and her phone number and email are on the screen there. Or you can go to their website at fvps.org if you'd like more information. Thanks for listening to this presentation, and I hope it was helpful to you.